Brad was he was intense about almost everything that he had to do. You know, I mean, he would, and he was, as I say, he was eccentric, and so much so that John Hurt used to be in awe of him because John liked to be eccentric. And before each take, you know, Brad would do his press-ups and handstands, and he had a bucket that he had to pee in before ever. Don't ask me why, but he did. And he kind of took everything very seriously. He really put his entire heart into the whole film. I've never really ever in my entire career had an actor who has put so much into a role.
Because he was the first person I saw doing all those sort of intensely tedious, methody things, like standing on his head and things, and doing deep breathing before every shot and so on. And in fact, it was one time I thought I'd get him back, and I was on the set and I was going like this. And he said, "What are you doing, John?" And I said, "What do you mean, what am I doing?" He said, "Well, what are you doing with your hands?" I said, "I'm doing my exercises before the shot." So but yes, I used to kid him a lot. And I suppose I did kind of look after him at that time.
And I kind of pushed him a lot during the film. Sometimes I felt that I pushed him too far, actually, on some of the more dramatic moments. But he gave his all to the film, and in fact, he was so intense when he made the film. You know, I mean, at the end of 53 days that it took to shoot, I always thought that he didn't think that he'd been in a film set for 53 days. He thought he'd been in prison for 4 years. He became Billy, totally, and I think that affected him, you know, mentally and physically, particularly in the days after the film. But with regards to me having an actor to give of their best, to do so brilliantly, and to give such attention and such time to making a film, which was absolutely total, I couldn't have been luckier, really, as a filmmaker. And in a funny kind of way, probably deep down, I was pleased that it wasn't a movie star.
Alan had a totally different way of approaching all four of us. With Brad, he used to shit on him from a great height, because that's the way that Brad responded, you know. With Randy, who you'd expect to be the big tough guy, actually is an enormously sensitive man, and he'd never ever give him notes in front of anybody else. He'd always take him behind the set or something and chat to him privately. With Norbert, he just sort of, I could see him just look at him and say, "Well, that's what I'm going to get, that's what I'm going to get." There's no point in saying anything. With me, he said, "Oh, well, you're just fucking English, get on with it."
I was very lucky in that, you know, I had Michael Saracen, who I'd worked a lot with before, and so he kind of understood, he has the same kind of visual sensibility as I have. I think the film has a very strong visual identity. Also, my camera operator had worked with me a lot before, was particularly good at handheld in the days before inventions like Steadicam. And it gave it, which is why I think the film now still looks very contemporary, actually, because I could block out conventionally in the normal, you know, wide, medium, close, whatever, but I also had the advantage of, I didn't shoot two cameras, which I would do now, but at the time it was just one camera, so we could afford. But a lot of it was handheld, which is intercut with conventional shooting, which gives it another level of energy, which, you know, the moment you do something where you've got terrific coverage, and you give that, you know, big pile of stuff to a brilliant editor like Jerry Hamblin, then out comes something remarkable. And is it exactly what you conceived it to be in the first place? Truthfully, probably not. You know, it's sometimes what you see in the back of your head when you finish the film, sometimes it's better than you imagined.
Name?
Oh, Jesus. William Hayes.
Name?
Hayes. H-A-Y-E-S.
Gel bakalım fotoğrafçı bey. Şu Amerikalı'nın fotoğrafını güzelce bir çekiver. Hadi yürü. Kalk, hazır ol. Bana afalı bakıyorsunuz ulan. Hoş geldin Amerikalı tıfıl, hoş geldin. Ulan herifle beraber...
This is a strange foreign place. We deliberately don't do subtitles for that reason. We want the audience to be as alienated as Billy Hayes must have felt. And you get this actually this melange of different languages even, you know. It's not really Turkish. I mean, Turkish people have pointed out to me many times.
The conversation between the Billy Hayes character and the guy when he's asking him what he had in the backpack, he's talking Maltese. He's not talking. He is not talking Turkish at all. We used Maltese because obviously these, again, a lot of these were non-actors, and so he spoke his own language.
It doesn't really matter because to us we were in Malta anyway, and we were in some strange world, some strange land that this American kid had found himself, and it really wasn't really about Turkey anymore. It was about being in a foreign place.
Get down, get down.
The heartbeat really, which we use very, very emphatically and very effectively, really it takes the place of music. Because in the end, the soundtrack of a film, people always talk about soundtrack thinking the soundtrack is actually a scored piece. And the soundtrack isn't. The soundtrack is actually the mixture of all the sounds that you put, layers of sounds that you put together. And sometimes that includes music, sometimes it doesn't. And you know, there can be 50 layers of sound in any particular scene. And using the heartbeat, which has been copied millions of times since in other movies, actually at that moment in time was rather original and gives you the edge of the seat tension that you require at that moment. I wanted the film to be organic, and we did make changes every day. Something changed. Some things were very significant in what was changed from the original screenplay. And the freedom to be able to do that is part of the creative process of making a film. I've been lucky really in all my films, 14 feature films, I've worked with the same editor, Jerry Hambling. He's pretty extraordinary at what he does, and I'm blessed to have him really. I think I shoot pretty accurately most of the time to what I want a cut to be. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you have to feel for the cut, and or the material that you've shot presents a different kind of cut to what you might have imagined when you shot it, quite frankly. Most of the times it's pretty well as I imagined it. I don't do storyboards, but I do lots of scribbles and drawings all the time, and from that, you know, the camera people, everybody seems to know what I want, and then with Jerry, it's the same process. There's no point in me really, I've never sat on his shoulder every single minute. I mean, I'm there all the time in the cutting rooms, but I do my work and he does his work, you know, and I'm forever writing notes on existing cuts or future cuts, you know. So it's pretty thoroughly worked out. But in the end, it's an organic process, and I take advantage of his great skill. And, you know, I don't cut myself, bear in mind all the 14 films that I've done with Jerry Hambling all been cut on film. So from the point of view of the physicality of it, it's very different to cutting digitally, obviously, which is a bit more hands-on probably for the director. But on film, he's about as good as you can be. And when someone's that great, you really don't want to interfere. And I can't remember the times when I've been totally disappointed with a cut. Sometimes I have been, but most of the times you just pinch yourself. You're so lucky to have somebody that brilliant. With the music, what happened was that I have what I call my toolkit method, which is I learn music all the way through, experimenting with different things. In the market in Istanbul, I had got a whole lot of Turkish tapes, which I fed into the soundtrack, you know, to give us a sense of alienation, and that runs all the way through the film. But the conventional score, I didn't really want a conventional score, and what I'd done is I had laid the music of Vangelis all the way through the film, and to tell you the truth, it really worked well.
We had an artist in our company, Casablanca Record and Films, where I was the chairman, and co-owner with Neil Bogart, and we had Giorgio Moroder, who was very successful in the disco and syncopation, orchestration world, and had many, many hit albums with Donna Summer and other artists. And he wanted to break into the composing of films. And we believed in him. And
I kind of said to Putnam, I don't really want to do this, you know. I said, I love what Vangelis has done, and I think that, you know, Vangelis is music that Vangelis had already done from his albums. It wasn't an original score that we would have done if we had gone the Vangelis route. And his next score that Vangelis did was Chariots of Fire. So can you imagine the music of Chariots of Fire on Midnight Express? That's how it would have probably sounded. So they said to me, well, just give Giorgio a try. And if you don't like what he does, then we can always fall back to Vangelis.
And Vangelis was not inexpensive, and this film was inexpensive. The film wasn't cheap. It was inexpensive. Very big difference. And Alan was a really intelligent soul. He was willing to cast a wide net, look at everybody. He could make the decision. It was his decision to make. We weren't going to enforce the decision on him in any way. But he was the kind of person that said, well, I'll look at anything. Why, if I can make a decision, why don't I look at all the options? And Giorgio met with him and listened to the music, and he said, cool, I think this could work. Giorgio won the Oscar. The album was a gigantic hit. And that's the Alan's testament and Giorgio's testament. I, again, was just a supporter. I was a person that believed in Giorgio, believed in Alan, believed in the film, and tried to edge the process forward. But, the real qualitative, creative aspect was Giorgio Moroder and Alan Parker in that decision.
So I went with Giorgio in Munich. There was just Giorgio, myself, and an engineer. And he had composed the basic themes, and of course it was all electronic, and was incredibly wonderful to work with because it was so easy to manipulate it. If you do a conventional score with someone wonderful, say like John Williams, you really don't know what you're going to get until you strike up the orchestra, and an 80-piece orchestra is playing away there, and it's very expensive, and to change things is quite difficult. But when it's all been created by one man with his whole set of tricks, it was very easy to do, and we had a tiny little screen of the film, and Giorgio did the whole thing actually himself with an engineer in Munich, and it was pretty great.
The studio was interesting in that. See, the studio's not the villain. I've been a studio head. I've been a chairman of a company. I've been every part of the process. But they're interested in 6, 7, 8, 10, 12, 15 films at once and 50 films in development. So they look at you, they make a decision, and they move on. And the then head of the studio said to me, over my dead body, will we use one of those disco themes in the movie? They didn't realize that Giorgio Moroder wrote all the disco themes. But again, fate and circumstance and our own prowess and our own ability to persuade and Alan Parker's vision and Giorgio Moroder's talent overcame that obstacle.
We had the template of Vangelis to go with, and I was able to be there with him as it was all created, and then of course then we mixed it with all of the effects and other musics that which we bled into it, and that became the soundtrack. And indeed, it was the first electronic soundtrack to win the Academy Award. Well, I wrote a letter to the crew before I started shooting, which was a pattern of films that I had done, the film I had done before, and certainly the films I did later, to try and put in my head and maybe the crew's heads kind of film that we were making. To me, it was a film about injustice, really, in a way in which the laws are so different in different countries, because cultures are so different in different countries. It was about the nearer verges of insanity, which I wanted to explore. I wanted to make an uncompromisingly brutal film. I made no bones about that right from the very beginning. And in a way, I suppose, there were two ways of looking at the film. Was this going to be a film about escape, or was this going to be a film about imprisonment? And in a funny kind of way, the balance went to imprisonment, I guess, mostly because we did change the story when we were filming, because the film had a different ending. One of the things that the studio insisted upon was based on a true story. In actual fact, it isn't. It's based on a true story, I suppose, vaguely, but it isn't a true story. The film isn't. Because what you have is, with regards to people's perception of what truth is, and truth is Billy Hayes himself, his memory of actually what happened to him in that prison. His own hubris obviously gets in the way when he starts to talk about the stories that happened to him in that prison. So truth has probably moved away a little bit there. And then he recounts the story to the ghostwriter, William Hoffer, who writes the book. And he puts his slant, literary slant, by virtue of the fact that he's writing a book for a publisher who wants to sell a lot of books. So truth gets moved along there. Oliver comes along and writes his screenplay, which, and he definitely moved truth away from the original in the inventions and fictions that he put into it. There was input from myself, Goober, in the studio with regards to that first draft, which then transformed the story even more because of the requirements, necessities of the studio with regard to what makes a strong, dramatically structured film, and therefore decisions were made and more fictions occurred because of that. So truth was moved away a little bit more. And certainly when I made the film, and a whole lot of stuff was done whilst we were filming, because the place itself and the situation and the whole 53-day intense journey that we were on making the film created another organic movie. A film was made again, and then when we edited it, another film occurred. So you get truth has moved away, all those things. So in a way, it's a fictional film. And in a way, it's a disservice to the film to say based on a true story. They wanted this, the studio, or Goober wanted it, because I suppose, you know, there's some cachet to the fact that it happened to be, a lot of it was true. But it got us into trouble later, particularly with Turkish people. And in a way, it was, I used to stop apologising for it being true, because it was a dramatic movie, and while we couldn't own up to the fact it was a dramatic movie, and decisions were made in order to make a terrific movie, and that was really first and foremost on everybody's mind.
I hate you. I hate your nation, and I hate your people. And I fuck your sons and daughters because they're pigs. You're a pig. You're all pigs.
Believe me, it was not at all directed at Turkey. And I regret that. I do regret that. And when I went to Turkey, they tried to make me apologize. I said, there's nothing, I'm not going to apologize. I regret the misunderstandings about racism that occurred, but it was not based in a racial approach to your country. Although he says you're a nation of pigs, which insults the Muslim concept, I realize that. But that was his anger talking, you know, to me. I mean, it was not, he never said that. But in the character's anger, it was such that I think he had to say something like that because he was at his wit's end.
At the Cannes Film Festival, I think was the first time we were a bit in shock, really, at the reaction to it. I mean, it went from being, you know, a brilliant masterpiece to a CIA-backed fascist scandal of the festival, in that you're not allowed to criticise other nations. And the criticism of the film was, of course, that there didn't seem to be a nice or pleasant Turkish person in the whole piece. Well, there isn't in the book either, actually, and the story we went was from that book. Although, as I've said, it got changed so much in minute detail in so many different stages that we'd created a complete fiction. And I think that for myself, I didn't ever think of myself when I was doing it, and boy, did I become so engrossed in making the film. I didn't even think that I was in Turkey, or even that my movie was. It was some strange foreign place that this kid had found himself, and that was all it was. So to be anti-Turkish was actually far from our mind. I think that the film does have a dark heart. I think that dark heart comes from Oliver Stone's original screenplay. I think there is a very powerful monologue in court, which probably disturbs a lot of people, particularly if you're Turkish. And in a way, you know, we were young filmmakers, and somewhat naive in that regard, I think. I mean, it's easy to say now, oh, I would have done it differently. I probably would be. I'm more intelligent, more worldly, you know, more politically astute than I probably was then. All I thought I was making was a movie. A really strong, dramatic movie about injustice of a penal system, and a very brutal penal system at that. All of the clues of which and all the evidence we'd have got from Billy Hayes' memoir. So I thought it was pretty accurate. Would you have someone now? You'd have the good guy, you know, like you always have a good Nazis, because not every German was horrible. Yeah, I suppose you would do that now. But I stand by the film completely and utterly, because it's the film that I wanted to make at that moment in time, and I'm still very, very proud of it.
Midnight Express was a really important watershed in my life, in Alan Parker's life, probably in Peter Guber's life, and Alan Marshall's life. It's a fine, fine, fine film. It moves people and affects people as much today as the day we made it, and you can't say that about a lot of films. I mean, there's not that many films that are able to work outside of their time. I think Midnight Express does. For me, The Killing Fields does. There are films that somehow transcend the moment in which they're shot.
It was leaving a executive job running a studio and starting down the road of being a riverboat gambler, which a producer is, and recognizing that you better suck all the juice, all the marrow out of the bone when they work, because when they don't work, wow, they're painful. And so it was exciting to go on a roller coaster ride of that film.
And that came together, and it was a moment in time, and it worked. Tremendous success for Columbia, big. And it launched my career out of nowhere. I was suddenly getting the Academy Award.
It was only my second film, so it was certainly a lot more controversial than the first one, which was a kids' gangster musical. But it was, yeah, I mean, it was my first brush with the fact that actually it isn't just about movies, and this is a very powerful way to communicate to people. It was a film that was hugely successful, and whatever is within it from a political point of view is actually going to get to a lot of people, and therefore it's naive of me to think, well, it's just a movie. Well, movies can do that. You know, they do it less and less these days because they already are about entertainment in the main. But sometimes film can be political, and it can show the human condition, and it can show how human beings can be cruel to one another. And out of that world, out of that situation, comes some kind of hope that we can be better. And I think all of that is in the film.
I love this movie. I love its energy. I love its vitality and madness. Its very zeal, its sense of excess. I mean, nothing wrong with that.
Why it holds up is there aren't stars that aged in it. You know, you're not seeing Robert Redford at 74. You're not seeing people that you know today. They're contemporary characters in some sense.
I make no excuses for it. I'm extremely proud of it. I think that it's 30 years old, and I actually defy anyone to look at 30-year-old films, any 30-year-old film, and see one that is as contemporary and has, you know, I'm very proud to say, influenced, you know, a lot of other filmmakers.